Everybody, here's Rich Gaugler again. This is the second and final presentation he's going to make. Today it's on Rancho Palos Verdes. And I want you to know, not only does Rich like potato chips, but he also likes shortbread cookies. Okay, Rich, you're on.
Okay. Well, if any of you remember my last one, I kind of went through the Spanish era, up through the Ranchos and Sepulveda and Dominguez, and this one kind of takes off from there. So with that, I'm going to turn my video off and I'm going to concentrate on the presentation. So for this one, we're going to start with Jonathan Bixby. And excuse me, George Bixby is actually, Jonathan was his father. So Jonathan Bixby acquired the PV area from the Sepulveda family when they were partitioning up what was left of their family's ranch. So he did that in 1882. And when George went to sell it in 2013, he sold most of it, although he kept 1,000 acres of it that later became Harbor City. And George at the time was living in a ranch house of about 7,000 square feet built in 1910. So I think a 7,000 square foot house in 1910 qualifies as a mansion. And it still stands over in Long Beach. You can see the address there, and I'm sure it's part of Bixby Knolls. But anyway, the remainder of the land had been used for ranching, and the ranching operations were discontinued in 1910. And so being a businessman, I'm sure he's like, okay, I got all this land, I wasn't making any money ranching, what am I going to do with it? So he decided to sell it. So what happens is actually a very complicated transaction, but there was a group that had a broker named Carl F. Schrader who was looking for financing. So he had an option to buy, but he needed to get the financing to close the purchase. And he tried to go and get San Francisco bankers, because that's where, of course, all the money in California was at the time. Couldn't get them interested. So he went to New York. And by the time he went to New York, he only had like 17 days left on his option. So if he doesn't come up with the financing in 17 days, it's going to revert right back to Bixby, and he can start all over again. But he managed to convince Frank Vanderlip to invest. And Frank put together a consortium. He got on the phone, called his buddies. He got about greater than 50 men that he knew that were, like, including bank presidents and railroad magnates and people like that he knew in New York City. So he came up with the money. And in 1913, they closed the deal for about $1.8 million. And according to an LA Times article at the time, it said that $1.8 million consisted of $741,184 in cash and $1 million in notes. And anyway, so after Frank closed the deal, he decides, hey, I got to go out and take a look at this property that I've bought sight unseen, and I've roped in all these other guys to buy it with me and make sure that I haven't thrown away my money. So he came out here in 1914, and he drove around a bit, and he said, wow, this just looks like the Amalfi Coast. So I want to build, his first thoughts during that is he wanted to build in the Italian style. So anyway, at the beginning, the first thing he wanted to do was he wanted to figure out, okay, where am I going to build my house? So he had some caretakers out here, and he had them set up meteorological stations all over the hill. And they took readings for a year. And out of that, he determined for what he considered, the best climate, it was Portuguese Bend. And he wanted less fog and wind and the best year-round temperature. Of course, as we all know, living around PV, the climate really is different depending on where you are. If you want to be hot, you can be hot. If you want to not be so hot, so you can kind of see that he didn't want it to be too hot, so he picked the Portuguese Bend area, and he was going to build this giant villa. And of course, the model of that giant villa we had in the museum for a long time. So I don't know where that ended up now, but does anybody know where that thing is now?
Ladera Linda.
Ah, okay. So so that was his house, but how was he gonna develop it? His plan was he was going to build 100-acre estates for all his New York business buddies, and he had to have a world-class country club, and that world-class country club would include 150 guest rooms, so they could stay out here if they hadn't built their houses yet. And it was going to be called Los Palos Verdes Country Club, and it was going to be over by Portuguese Bend because that's where his house was, of course. And it was going to include polo grounds, tennis courts, and he wanted to put in a pier so they could tie up their yachts, and a little airport so they could fly in. And when he's thinking about, how to develop the peninsula, he hired the landscape architectural firm of the Olmsted brothers, who were, of course, their father was very, very famous because he had done Central Park in New York City. So he thought, okay, these guys can do what I want. And of course, one of the things he wanted to do was he wanted to build that artisan village. It was the other model that we used to have displayed. And it was going to be right there where the Golden Cove Shopping Center and Rancho PV City Hall are located. But that was actually derailed by the government plans for the lighthouse. So in 1916, Congress approved the funding for the PV Point Vicente lighthouse. And they wanted to build there. Of course, Frank owned the land. He didn't want them to build it there, and that was actually under litigation for quite a few years. Of course, like they say, you can't fight City Hall, and in the end, you can't fight the U.S. Congress, so they won, and the Point Vicente Lighthouse was built. But after that, the artisan village never went anywhere. And then the remainder of his plans for the 100-acre estates, got derailed by this advent of World War I. So all that went kind of by the wayside. But he continued to do a little bit on his own property, and he built the guest house. He'd already built the cottage. That was his first house. Then he built the guest house, which at the time was called the Balita, in 1924, and then it was later named Villa Narcissa. And a number of us were able to get a tour of that last year, and so you're going to see a picture of that in a second. And one of the things you really don't hear too much about is Frank's wife, but Frank's wife, Narcissa Cox Vanderlip, was a founder of the League of Women Voters, and a good friend of Eleanor Roosevelt. And the story is she actually got Eleanor Roosevelt interested in politics. So, and so here's a picture that I took last year when we were taking the tour of Villa Narcissa. And you can see there's somebody walking down the trail there. This is on those like 300 steps that go up to their little area up there where they had weddings. So can anybody guess who that person is walking down the steps in front of me there?
Jim
Yes,
Smith.
I can.
So I think this is you, Jim.
Probably right, although it's hard to tell.
You were on that tour, right?
We organized it.
Yeah. Okay. That's why I was pretty sure of that, but I believe that's you.
It's a good picture of me. Can't tell who I am.
Anyway, you can see it was a gorgeous day, the day we had the tour. So anyway, I thought I would include the picture there from my own collection. All right, so what happened with the first commercial development? Well, a real estate developer named E.G. Lewis in around 1921, he acquired an option to buy most of PV from Frank for about $5 million. And he started what he called the Palos Verdes project with 3,225 acres, mostly on the west side of the hill. And it also included a little section of what's now Miralest. And as part of it, once again, they had a lot of complicated land deals, but this one, the property was actually transferred to what's called the PV Trust Indentive. And that trust is what led to there being a homeowners association that manages, what is built in the area, and the art jury that to this day still controls construction in PV Estates and Miralest. So it all dates back to this initial purchase. In the meantime, so you had to have roads to get in there and develop it. So the first road built was PV Drive in the Valmonte and Malaga Cove area. And then they built the Coast Road. They call it the Coast Road from Redondo Beach to San Pedro in 1926. And you look at the map of that, and it's not all PV Drive. It actually went down PV Drive South, and then up PV Drive East, and then down Miralest Drive into San Pedro. Because of course they were developing Miralest. So the other part of PV Drive South going straight down to 25th Street in San Pedro was not built at that time. In the meantime, the first commercial building was completed in Malaga Cove. It's the Gardner Building, and they immediately moved their people from the PV project into those offices. Prior to that building being built, all the people working on the PV project were housed in what was an old hotel in Redondo Beach, abandoned hotel. And actually, after they moved out of the hotel, it was called the Redondo Hotel. And after the project people moved out of that hotel was torn down. But so Lewis was trying to get this going, but he was kind of a colorful character, did a lot of interesting things, and he started having problems within a couple of years. And Vanderlip actually took control of the project in around 1923, and Lewis eventually went bankrupt just a couple of years later. So when Vanderlip took control of the PV project, you have to understand he still owned outright the other 13,000 acres. So the option that E.G. Lewis had to buy the rest of it went by the wayside, and all that was sold in this was just the 3,225 acres, and Vanderlip retained complete control of the rest of it. So how did they go about developing it? Well, they built the Levent Inn in 1924, and they used that as a real estate sales office. And you have to remember that the land at that time was nothing really but coastal sage with a few trees. And coastal sage with a few trees is not necessarily going to be a great way to sell property. So they thought they'd better have some additional plantings available. So they built a large nursery in Lanada Bay to grow the plants that they could use to landscape the new houses. And as part of the way things were going at this time, the trustee that was in control of that 3,225 acres, they deeded 800 acres of that to the homeowners association for public use. And if they didn't use it for public use, it would return to the trustee. And of course, as part of that, they built the PV golf course that opened in 1924. A very important milestone for me because I'm a member of that and I love that golf course. So, and they also built the swimming club in 1931, which is still standing as the PV Beach Club. But during all this time, right, so in 1929, you had the stock market crash. It became very difficult for them to sell any property. So basically, the trustee kind of pulled out and gave homeowners association, said, okay, this is yours. You got to deal with all this mess. And they pulled out. And then the homeowners association was having trouble. They owed a whole bunch of back taxes of property taxes to the state. And they became concerned that the state was going to foreclose on them. So what they did to do that, to combat that, is they incorporated. So they incorporated in 1939 as PV Estates. And here's a picture of Point Vicente and Long Point here from the 1930s. So you can see Long Point is sticking out to the right there. So, and before any grading was done to put in marine land, so it's at its full height, and Point Vicente at the bottom. So it's hard to see, but the lighthouse is already there, but you can see the road at least going down to the lighthouse. And really the only roads that you see there is you see what later became Hawthorne Boulevard. It was called Crest Road at the time. And you can see it, the intersection of Hawthorne with PV Drive south there, and then continuing on in both directions. So you can see all the way up, to just, it looks like Abalone Cove is right at the top, very top of the picture. So another interesting thing that happened around this time is UCLA was looking for a new campus. They were housed down in Vermont, on this Vermont Avenue. The Palos Verdes project had originally set aside 1,000 acres for a university campus. And it was up where Peninsula High School and the Peninsula Center are. The only problem with that area was it was a seasonal lake every winter until around 1945 when it finally got developed. But anyway, it was considered as a possible location, and they had to put together basically, there was 17 different proposals made to UCLA by the different localities, and the PV presentation, some of their inducements they included said, well, we'll build you a grammar school, a high school, and they were going to build a 140,000 seat football stadium. And they also were going to include a boathouse at Portuguese Bend. But UCLA, as we all know, chose Westwood. And so no UCLA in Palos Verdes. But I don't know if anybody knew that when I was doing this research, that's the first time I'd heard that PV was considered as at one time for the UCLA campus. So the next thing that happened is around 1931, another developer named A.E. Hansen went to Vanderlip and said, hey, you know, instead of doing this Italian style stuff, that's not selling so good anymore. Let me go with ranch style homes. And Frank said, okay, I'll give you 1,000 acres to try your idea out. And since he was going ranch style, you know, horse property stuff, he gave him the land at the top of the hill. And one of the reasons why he gave him the land at the top of the hill is the county was building some roads. You obviously had to have road access. And you can see here, PV Drive North was completed in 1935. So that gave him access into what's now Rolling Hills. But anyway, and he was successful, and they got their first post office in 1937, and they incorporated later in 1957. So it's still there behind the gates. Now, why they ended up behind the gates, that part I haven't figured out. I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that one. So other Vanderlip land decisions that were going on at the time, you can see in 1936, Frank donated 33 acres for Chadwick, and he died shortly after that. In 1946, Frank Jr. donated the land for PV College, which is now Marymount, and Narcissa donated the land for the Wayfarers Chapel in 51. And then they sold the land for marine land in the early 50s. Now, the next large player that enters the stage was the Great Lakes Carbon Corporation. And they've been around since 1944, mining diatomaceous earth. And their mine, you still see the remnants of it there when you're on Hawthorne Boulevard driving up the hill, right there at the corner of Hawthorne Boulevard and Via Valmani. That was the mine location right in the back there. There's a big pit back in there. So anyway, that mine was getting exhausted, and so they were saying, okay, how are we gonna continue operation around here? And they'd done a little exploration, and they'd found another deposit. And they wanted to buy that land where the other deposit was from the Vanderlips. And Frank Jr. at that point said, well, he didn't really want to sell that. So in the end, they negotiated back and forth, and eventually Frank decided to sell what was left of their holdings, which was 6,800 acres, to Great Lakes in 1953. For $9 million. And so at that point, the family had sold everything except for the 500 acres they had at Portuguese Bend. Anyway, that new deposit of diatomaceous earth didn't turn out to be that great. So Great Lakes had to say, okay, what are we going to do now? And so they decided to start developing the land. And they hired Victor Gruen Associates to develop their master plan, and it got approved by the county in 1955. And then, so kind of going on concurrent with that, the Strawberry Lane and Dapple Gray areas had got developed post-World War II, and that was the first parts of Rolling Hills Estates. Which makes sense. It's down closest to what was then Moore City. But when they started doing this additional construction in the mid 50s, the citizens once again became concerned because the final decision on any land use was with the county because it was unincorporated land. So if you're unincorporated, the county runs you. And then they say, what do the county supervisors know about what we want here? So they got a special election in September of 1957 and formed their own city. So that's when Rolling Hills Estates was formed. And later on, they ended up annexing Montecillo and the Peninsula Center. So I'm pretty sure they wanted the Peninsula Center for the tax revenue. And anyway, when they annexed Montecillo, they got me. So although I wasn't here at the time, but that's where I am now. So in the meantime, what about Rancho Palos Verdes? So Rancho Palos Verdes had some of the same people living there, which was at the time unincorporated county land. They had the same concerns as Rolling Hills Estates regarding the county control of the land. And what pushed it over the edge was a new master plan that the county approved in 1969 that had housing density that was way more than what the people wanted that were living here. So they started, there was their own special election in 1973, and it passed by a 5-to-1 margin. And so then Rancho PV was incorporated in September of 1973. So what's been going on in Rancho PV? Well, obviously Marineland was already there before they incorporated and continued operations until '87. Largest oceanarium in the world when opened, and I know you've seen lots of other presentations about Marineland, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. And then it sat empty until some developers bought it in 1995. And then eventually Terrenea was built and opened in 2009. So one last little bit of trivia about the area is the Hardin House. And the Hardin House is land that's right across PV Drive from the entrance to the Vanderlip Estate. And the land was given by Frank to his sister Ruth and her husband Eddie Hardin. And that was going to be their big estate. And I've actually seen some pictures in the library when they first started doing it, and they leveled the top of Portuguese Point. It was just nothing but dirt. They'd flattened it, and you could see they were getting ready to build something there. But all they ended up building was their house that was built in the late 1920s. And then, of course, the stock market crash probably derailed the rest of those plans. But they held on to the property. And finally, when Ruth died, the 2 acres where the house was built was sold separately, but the 46 acres of undeveloped land was sold to the city at that time. And that's how we ended up with Abalone Cove Shoreline Park. And one of the other things, so the house that was there was used, at least the land was used in a movie in the early 60s that when I was a little kid, it was one of my favorite movies. And it was called It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. And I don't know how many of you saw or remember that movie, but the big goal of that whole movie was they were trying to get here to the Big W. And the Big W was right there on the Hardin Estate. So those palm trees, they're all fallen down now. The 4 palm trees there were all right there on the top of the bluff, looking right over Abalone Cove Shoreline Park. So, and when I first moved here in 1979, and I was driving back and forth on PV Drive all the time, I saw the entrance to the Hardin House, and I said, that has got to be the same spot where the W's got to be behind there. I just know it's there. And I could never find any proof of it. I looked for years and years and years trying to find proof of it. And it's only in the last year, I actually watched, my wife and I watched the movie again just a few months ago. And after that, I got busy on my iPad, started looking on the internet and all this stuff, and I found some videos on it. And I actually got this picture from Google Earth. If you go to Google Earth, it shows it as a museum. Apparently, there was a proposal to have a museum there at one point. But when you click on it, it gets you can get some additional pictures, and there's the W. So, and I'll close with
Rick, an added thing. That was just the gatehouse of the estate. That was not their primary house. The house was going to be built out on the bluff, and that was just
okay.
the gatehouse. Yeah,
the gatehouse that was like 6 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms and what have you. But yeah. So here's a quote from Frank when he first made his first trip here in 1914. When I first saw it, I came to a mental halt. Although I had become used to handling large projects, I was overwhelmed by this possession. And he wanted to ensure the development was in harmony with the magnificent landscape. So you just wonder what he would think if he saw what his dream ended up like today. So, and that's all I got.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yes, this is Linda DiNoto. Could you comment on the annexation or whatever it is of the land on the opposite side of the harbor on Western Boulevard and why it is now called Rancho Palos Verdes and how that came about? And yet the schools are not Palos Verdes schools?
Yeah, that area was also, it was unincorporated city land or unincorporated county land. Everybody, I think it had San Pedro postal address, but it was unincorporated. And I think the city of Rancho PV was looking for some more tax revenue, and so they annexed it.
Okay, all right. Did we vote on that? Does anybody remember?
So, and I do know that when they annexed it, one of the controversies was the schools. And actually, as part of the annexation, the people that lived in the new property had a choice to stay going to the schools they were going to, or they could go to the PV schools.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So,
And then I have one more question. I had heard a rumor that the land on the other side of Palos, on the Torrance or the Lomita side of Palos Verdes Drive North, wanted to be annexed by the city of Torrance. Did you uncover anything about that?
no, I haven't heard anything about that. I do know as part of the development of Rolling Hills Country Club, they had to, the quarry that was there was half in Rolling Hills Estates and half in Lomita. And they had to have Rolling Hills Estates annex the rest of that so that all of Rolling Hills Country Club is in Rolling Hills Estates.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
I have a question. Why was the Westfield area left as unincorporated?
You know, I don't know. I never ran across anything on that. So
I can help with that. This is Jim. There's a law in California that says cities have to be one contiguous piece. And Rolling Hills Estate didn't want it, and Rancho Palos Verdes couldn't get to it. It would have been a two-piece city. So that's why it was left as unincorporated county.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Well, can it be decided without voter?
Okay, are there any more questions? I guess that's it. Next week, we're going to have Randy Harwood talk about animal life in Rancho Palos Verdes naturalist training. He's from the Land Conservancy. He's supposed to have wonderful, wonderful pictures. So I hope I see all of you next Thursday as well.